The desert opened before him like an old wound that never learned to close. Wind scraped the stone. The sun rose without mercy, turning the land into a field of glare and bone. Silas Vale rode through it all, a man carved from shadow and consequence. His horse's breath came in short bursts, steaming faintly in the chill of early dawn. The saddle creaked with each rhythm of hooves, slow and deliberate like the ticking of a weary heart. He had seen too much of war and none of peace. Men's screams echoed in his sleep the way coyotes howled at night, constant accusing too human to forget. Ahead, a thin column of smoke twisted upward, barely visible against the pale sky. He followed it without thought, drawn as if by instinct. The air thickened with the stench of burned hide and wet ash. By the time he reached the campsite, it was nothing but ruined, blackened poles, scattered belongings, and the smell of death lingering like a prayer gone unanswered. Then he heard it, not a cry, not quite. More like breath trying to remember itself. He dismounted, boots crunching the scorched earth. Near a half-collapsed post, a shape moved. She was chained there, half-hidden by shadow wrists torn raw against the iron. Her hair, long black tangled, clung to her skin in dusty ropes. Her eyes, when she lifted them, did not beg. They burned. Silas froze. Something in that gaze told him she had already faced death and chosen not to look away. Without a word, he drew his knife and knelt beside her. The chain snapped with a dull click. She didn't flinch, didn't thank him either. He offered water. She stared at the flask, then at him before taking it with shaking hands. She drank 2 sips, no more. Her lips bled where they cracked, and still she kept her pride intact. When he gestured toward his horse, she hesitated, then rose. The desert stretched endless behind her, no path, no tribe, no promise. She followed only because walking away alone meant dying slower. They rode under a rising sun that made every stone shimmer with heat. Neither spoke. The silence was thick enough to bruise. By noon he stopped under the skeleton of a dead tree. He untied a strip of jerky, passed it to her. She ate in small bites, eyes on the horizon. He almost spoke, then almost said something about mercy, or fate, or how the desert had a cruel way of giving second chances. But the words died in his throat. At dusk, when the wind shifted and the last of the light bled from the rocks, she finally spoke. Her voice was rough but steady. "I'd rather die than be yours." The sound cut through him cleaner than any bullet. He looked at her, the fading sun washing her face in red dust, and for the first time in years he didn't know whether he'd just saved a life or unleashed a ghost that would follow him forever. CTA. If this moment hooked you, comment 1 to keep riding deeper into the desert with them. They traveled 2 more days through wind and silence. The sky burned white by noon and froze blue by night. She gave her name the second evening, Aiyana. No tribe name, no lineage, just that single word soft as wind through grass. Silas didn't ask more. He wasn't a man who deserved anyone's stories. By the 3rd morning, the land shifted from sand to stone. Charred remains of wagons lay half buried along the ridge ghosts of another convoy. He recognized one brand, burned into a splintered beam, HM, the mark of Hammond's caravans. His stomach tightened. Hammond, a merchant, who paid for blood when law wasn't enough. Silas had once ridden for him years ago, guarding shipments that moved through Apache country. The memory carried the taste of smoke and guilt. He turned his horse away, hoping she hadn't noticed, but Aiyana's gaze was fixed on that mark, and in her silence he felt the weight of recognition. That night they camped beside a dry creek. The firelight danced on their faces, showing more than words could. She kept her distance, watching him through the smoke. When he slept, she moved quietly around the ashes, searching. Her hand brushed against the saddlebag and found a small leather pouch. Inside lay a child's necklace, bone beads, carved with a symbol of twin wings and a blade between them. The same crest worn by the raiders who had slaughtered her village. Her breath caught. For a moment the world shrank to that object, to memory itself, fire, screams, the smell of burning corn. She woke him with a shove, eyes bright with fury. "Where did you get this?" Silas sat up slow, his expression unreadable. "I kept it." "You kept this." Her voice cracked. "You were one of them." "No." He stared into the fire. "I buried one of them." Aiyana raised the knife he had used to free her, the blade trembling in her grip. Whose? He hesitated, and that pause damned him. "It belonged to a boy," he said finally, voice low. "He tried to run when the shooting started. I got to him too late. He was still holding it." She froze. The world went silent but for the hiss of fire eating dry wood. Her brother had worn that necklace. The knife fell from her hand. The desert swallowed the sound. She turned away, trembling, half from rage, half from a grief she thought had already burned itself to ash. Silas didn't move. He couldn't. The night closed around them like a wound stitching itself shut, and in the dark, both of them knew mercy was no longer something given. It was something owed. Absolutely, here comes the middle stretch, where silence turns to fragile trust, and the desert starts demanding payment for mercy. Tone remains ash and blood, sparse dialogue, heat-scorched imagery, guilt as the only shadow they can't outrun. At dawn, they found the canyon, a wound in the earth so deep, the sun had to fight to touch it. Wind moved through the hollow like breath, through an old flute, dry and mournful. The walls shimmered in layered reds and umber, streaked with the white veins of ancient rivers that had long since vanished. It wasn't safe, but it offered shade, and that was enough. Aiyana slid from the horse, first bare feet sinking into the sand. Her wrists were still raw from iron, the skin split and scabbed where the shackles had rubbed her thin. When the light hit them, the wounds glimmered like dull copper. Silas tethered the horse near a rock outcrop and built a fire from twisted sage, the kind that burned quick and clean. He placed a tin cup of water beside her and said nothing. She didn't look at him. Didn't thank him. Just drank slow, deliberate, as if every drop might accuse her of needing help. The silence between them was not peace. It was a waiting thing, heavy and aware. The canyon caught the sound of the fire's hiss and gave it back smaller like an echo, half ashamed of itself. When the sun rose higher, Silas moved toward the edge, scanning the horizon for dust trails, nothing but wind and emptiness. Still, he could feel eyes somewhere behind the desert's distance. Men didn't forget humiliation easily, especially men who thought they owned the world. Hours passed. The day bled into copper, then gray. The fire burned low. Only when the first cold draft rolled down from the ridges did Aiyana stand. She walked to the fire and sat opposite him, her posture straight, her chin unbowed. For the first time since they'd fled, she spoke. "You buried him." Her voice was little more than sand on stone. Silas nodded. "I did. With your own hands." "Yes." She watched the flames as if they carried some language older than both of them. "Then the desert took mercy on him," she said after a long silence. "Not you." He didn't answer. There was nothing to defend. His hands still carried the smell of the grave earth, and mercy had never been something he trusted. When the cold deepened, he tossed another handful of sage on the coals. The smoke curled between them, bitter and sweet, carrying the scent of memory-burned hair, charred wood, campfires from another life. Coyotes cried far off, their voices thin and patient, as if calling back the ghosts of everything the land had swallowed. Silas unrolled his blanket but didn't lie down. He sat near the fire, legs drawn up, staring into the orange glow, until his eyes blurred. Across from him, Aiyana lay curled on her side, her face turned toward the canyon wall. Her braid, long and dark, rested against her arm like a rope half unspooled. He wondered what it had looked like before the chains, before the flight. Then he stopped wondering. The past was a door he'd locked long ago. Sometime near midnight, she stirred and whispered something in her own tongue, soft, rhythmic, almost a prayer. He didn't know the words, but the sound carried weight. Sorrow and endurance folded together. It made the night feel less empty. When she finished, she turned her face toward the fire, and for a fleeting moment her eyes opened. They caught the glow not with fear but clarity. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go north. There's a spring at Red Mesa Ridge." Silas studied her a moment. "You lead," he said finally. The wind rose again, sweeping through the canyon mouth. It smelled of cedar and old rain, a scent that didn't belong in this dry place. Neither spoke after that, but in the quiet, something unseen began to take shape. Not forgiveness. Not yet, only the smallest understanding that neither of them would leave the other to die. By dawn, the air had turned silver. Mist clung to the lower stones, and the canyon floor glittered faintly with dew. Silas rose first. His movements were automatic, feeding the horse, checking the rifle, adjusting the cinch straps. The world looked clean again in that pale light, but the illusion didn't hold. When he turned, he saw Aiyana kneeling near the fire pit, her fingers tracing circles in the ash. She looked up briefly. "Why do you still help me?" she asked. He shrugged. "Habit, maybe. Habit of saving things." Her tone was edged. "Habit of trying," he said. Saving never worked. She tilted her head, studying him, as if measuring the truth in his voice. Then she said quietly, "Where I'm from, men don't bury their enemies." Where I'm from, he replied, we bury everyone. Otherwise, the land keeps their bones. That made her almost smile. Almost. Then she stood and began tightening the bundle of supplies he'd packed. Her wrists shook slightly, but she didn't ask for help. They left as the first light poured over the rim, cutting the canyon in half, one side gold, the other still asleep. The horses' hooves left perfect imprints in the wet sand, and each one felt like a promise they might not keep. For miles neither spoke. The land did all the talking, wind through rock hollows, the call of a hawk wheeling above the rasp of leather and breath. Around midday they stopped near a dry creek bed. Aiyana crouched to test the dust, her fingers pressing into the cracks. There was water here once, she said. There's water everywhere once, Silas replied. She glanced at him, not sure if that was bitterness or poetry. Maybe both. They walked on. The sun grew meaner, the air thick with the taste of iron. When they finally reached a slope of red stone that climbed toward the distant ridge, Aiyana's steps faltered. She leaned against a boulder, breath ragged. Silas offered the canteen, but she shook her head. You'll need it later. I'll need you walking, he said simply. That made her accept it. She drank once, twice, then handed it back without thanks, which he preferred. As they climbed, a shadow swept across the ridge, the slow arc of a hawk, gliding low. Aiyana paused, eyes following it. That's a sign, she murmured. Of what? That we are not lost. He didn't argue, but part of him wanted to. The land didn't give signs. It gave warnings. Still, he said nothing. The wind pressed against them like a living thing, and together they pushed forward. By the time they reached the upper ledge, the sun was sliding west. Below them stretched a desert that looked endless, the color of old blood and gold. Silas scanned it through narrowed eyes. He saw movement near the horizon, faint but deliberate, a trail of dust. Riders. Maybe two, maybe more. He didn't point it out. He didn't have to. Aiyana had already seen. They're tracking us, she said. Maybe. No, not maybe. Her voice was steady. Men who follow don't stop for rest. He studied her face, the calm, the refusal to panic, and realized she'd spent her whole life being hunted. He nodded toward the ridge ahead. Then we make the spring before they do. The wind sharpened, carrying grit that stung the skin. They descended into a narrow pass where the light turned amber and the shadows lengthened. The canyon here was older, carved by rivers that had long disappeared, its silence heavier. When they finally stopped again, night was coming fast. Silas gathered driftwood from the dry wash and lit a small fire sheltered between stones. The flame licked upward, weak at first, then steady. Aiyana sat close enough to feel the warmth, but not close enough to share it. Her hands rested palm up on her knees, a gesture he recognized, prayer or memory. He couldn't tell. You believe in signs, he said after a while. You believe the land remembers. It does, she said simply. Everything buried still speaks. He poked the fire with a stick. Then it has a lot to say to me. Maybe that's why you keep moving, she said softly. So you don't have to listen. He didn't respond. The fire popped, sending a small spark to die between them. She lay down, pulling her blanket to her chin, eyes fixed on the stars beginning to bleed through the dusk. Silas stayed awake long after his rifle resting across his knees. The desert breathed around them, alive and watchful. When sleep finally came for him, it was shallow, uneasy. He dreamed of the graves he'd dug, of voices calling through sand. But beneath the noise of ghosts, another sound lingered, a woman's whisper in a language he didn't know, steady as heartbeat, promising nothing but endurance. He woke before dawn. The fire was dead. Aiyana was already up, wrapping the horse's reins. She looked at him, her face unreadable in the half-light. We keep north, she said. He nodded, slinging the rifle across his shoulder. As they rode out, the first light broke across the desert floor, turning every grain of dust into gold. The canyon behind them swallowed their footprints like it had swallowed 1,000 before. Neither of them looked back. The days after the canyon bled together, the same sun, the same horizon, the same dull ache behind their ribs that no water or sleep could fix. Dust gathered on their clothes and never left. The land rolled on in colors of bone and rust, the world stripped down to wind, hunger, and distance. They walked more than they rode. The horse limped from a stone bruise, and Silas's shoulder ached where the bullet had passed years ago. Each step pulled something loose inside him, a memory, a regret, a question he had no strength left to answer. Aiyana didn't complain either. Her feet were split and raw inside cracked leather shoes. Yet she moved like someone who had already decided pain was only another kind of weather. Sometimes when the wind settled for a moment, she would murmur a few words in her tongue, small, shapeless syllables that seemed meant for the earth instead of him. He didn't ask what they meant. The sound itself felt like a bridge over the silence that had been eating them both. At noon, she taught him how to trace antlines to find hidden water. "They know the way home," she said. "If you follow them, you will too." He followed, half skeptical, but the path led them to a shallow pool ringed by salt grass. The reflection in the water startled him. A gaunt man with hollow eyes, his face burned the same color as the desert. He didn't recognize himself. In the evenings, she would test leaves between her fingers, crush them, taste them, nod, or shake her head. "Rain hides in the bitter ones," she explained once. "It's how the earth remembers thirst." He said nothing, but he began to watch her hands, the way her fingers moved like they were reading the air. Once at dusk, she hummed. Not a melody, not something made to be heard, more like memory pretending to be sound. The note trembled low and broke like smoke thinning in wind. Silas turned his head before she could see his face. He didn't understand the song, but it hollowed him out. He realized then he was watching her not the way men looked at beauty, but the way the dying looked at light, not wanting to own it, only to stay near long enough to remember what it was. On the fourth day, they reached the ridge. The land fell open beneath them, a long valley stitched with thorn trees, stone ruins scattered like the bones of old homes. Aiyana stopped, breath caught in her throat, her eyes fixed on the broken dwellings below. "This place," she said slowly, "belonged to my people. Before Hammond's men came." Silas didn't ask which Hammond. There were always men like that, ranchers, soldiers, speculators, whose names spread like plague through every canyon in the territory. He only nodded. The air itself felt heavier, as if the soil remembered the weight of every footstep it had buried. They descended at twilight and built a small fire between the fallen walls. The stones still held the day's warmth, and for the first time since they met, she took the lead in the simple rituals of survival. She gathered fruit from a nearby cactus, cut away the needles with her knife, and roasted them over the coals. When she handed him one, its sweetness burned his tongue, the bitterness clinging after like confession. He took it like communion. The night widened around them, a bowl of black and starlight. Wind hissed through the ruins, carrying faint echoes, rhythmic, almost musical. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks again, but Aiyana stood suddenly, every muscle tense. "Do you hear that?" he did. Faint, distant, the pulse of drums. "It's a burial song," she whispered. Her face had gone pale in the firelight. "Someone's dead nearby." She started walking before he could stop her. "Wait," he called, but she didn't. Her steps were sure guided by some sense older than fear. He followed reluctantly, hand resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder. The wind grew colder as they descended the slope. Bones littered the sand ribs, skulls, the hollow architecture of forgotten lives. Then they saw them, 4 figures in shadow gathered around an open grave. Men with braids bound tight, faces marked with soot. Aiyana froze. One of the men looked up. Recognition struck first, then fury. He spoke in Apache, the words sharp and heavy. "You return here," he spat. "After what you did." Her voice faltered. "What I did," he pointed into the grave. Inside lay a woman, wrapped in woven cloth, her skin ash gray beneath the torchlight, a broken sunburst charm resting against her throat. Aiyana's breath caught. "Nola," she whispered. Her cousin, her friend, the only one who had survived the massacre at Bitter Spring. "She trusted you to lead them to safety," the man hissed. "You led them to Hammond's fire." Silas stepped forward. "She didn't stay out of this, white man." The words cracked through the air like a whip. Silas stopped, his hand tightening on the rifle. But the damage was done. Aiyana stood rooted, her face stripped bare. And then the truth crawled out of the dark. The night of the massacre, she had revealed the tribe's escape route to a cavalry scout in exchange for her brother's life, a promise traded for blood. And the next morning, when the smoke rose, her brother's body had been among the dead. Her knees gave out. She sank beside the grave, her fingers clutching the sand until it bled between them. "I only wanted him to live," she said. The words came small, half-broken, but the men heard them. "You've got no tribe now," their leader said. "No spirit left to guard you." They turned and disappeared into the dark, their torches fading one by one, until only the wind remained. Silas stepped closer, but she raised a hand without looking up. "Don't." He stopped. The fire in his chest dimmed to smoke. He'd seen guilt before, but never like this. Not worn as shame, but as armor. The desert went still. Even the drums were gone. Only the wind moved slow and merciless, scattering sand across the grave, until it began to cover the cloth-wrapped body. For a long time, neither spoke. Then quietly he said, "You couldn't have known what they'd do." Her voice was hoarse. "I knew exactly what they'd do." He knelt beside her anyway, the firelight from the ridge trembling on his hands. "Then we're the same," he said. She turned to him, eyes hollow yet alive. "No. You buried your guilt. I carry mine." He didn't argue. The wind would have swallowed his words anyway. She pressed her palm to the earth beside the grave, as if asking the soil for something it might not give. Then she rose slow but certain, her shadow long and dark against the ridge. "Come," she said. "We finished this at Hammond's camp." Silas hesitated. Why now? Because the dead can't rest while their killers breathe. He looked at her, saw the resolve that bordered on madness, and knew he would follow. Not out of duty, not out of redemption, but because walking beside her was the only truth left that didn't rot. They climbed back to the ridge. The fire they'd left had burned to embers, wind swirling the ash into small spirals that danced and vanished. Aiyana stood over it, her face unreadable. "What will you do when you find him?" Silas asked. "What I should have done that night." The wind picked up loud enough to steal her voice. He caught only fragments, brother, fireblood, mercy. None of them fit together, yet all of them belonged. When they finally began walking again, the horizon cracked with lightning, heat lightning, distant and cruel, promising rain that never came. The storm never touched them. It only watched, flickering on the edge of the world like a god too tired to intervene. They moved through it, two silhouettes carved from the same stubborn dust. Behind them, the wind roared up the valley, lifting sand and ash in twisting columns that blurred the ground from the sky. Silas looked back once. The grave was already gone, swallowed by the desert. But the sound of the drums, faint and ghost-like, rose again somewhere behind the wind. It followed them for miles, fading and returning, until it was impossible to tell whether it came from the earth or from within their own chests. By the time dawn reached them, the ridge was far behind. The world smelled of ash and rain that refused to fall. Aiyana walked ahead, her braid whipping in the wind, her shoulders squared against the morning. Silas followed, not because he believed in redemption, but because in a land that buried everything, she was the only thing still moving forward. And somewhere inside the howl of the wind, beneath the dust, beneath the ghosts, there was a thin sound, almost human, almost forgiveness. By the time they reached Hammond's territory, the sky had turned the color of rust, a dying sun bleeding over a land that had already forgotten kindness. The wind came from the south, heavy with heat, and the smell of iron pushing sand through the canyon like the breath of some tired god. It hissed between rocks, whispering of old graves and things better left buried. They moved carefully, one shadow, one echo, their steps barely touching the earth. The canyon narrowed until the world became a throat of stone. From beyond it came the faintest scent, gun oil smoke and arrogance. Below them, Hammond's outpost crouched in the dust, half fort, half scar. The place looked like it had been hammered together by greed, stolen timber, scavenged nails, a roof patched with rusted tin. Barrels of kerosene sat beside stacks of rifles. Men lounged on the porch, boots up, rifles resting lazy but ready across their knees. Aiyana crouched behind a boulder. Her braid was streaked with ash from the last campfire, her eyes sharp as obsidian. "This is where it happened," she whispered. Silas's face was carved with exhaustion. "And where it ends." The sun fell slow as a hanging. They waited for night. Every hour stretched long. The outpost's fire flickered through the cracks in the walls, throwing trembling shadows across the sand. Aiyana's fingers moved over the rifle Silas had taught her to use, touch, like prayer memory, like blade. Silas checked his revolver. 6 bullets, old but true. He turned the cylinder once, listening to the click like a heartbeat. "Don't miss," he said quietly. "I won't," she replied. Her voice carried no bravado, only certainty. When the wind shifted, they moved. 2 shapes slid through the dark, swallowed by it. The guards on the porch never saw them, not until it was too late. The first man fell with a gurgle throat torn open by a silent knife. The second turned lantern, swinging too slow. Aiyana fired. The lantern burst in his hands, flames spilling into the sand, crawling hungrily along the trail of oil that lined the porch. The night caught fire. Flames licked the timbers, crawling up the walls like orange snakes. Gunshots cracked, echoing across the valley. The air filled with the stink of powder and fear. "Who's there?" someone shouted. Silas's revolver answered 2 quick flashes, one scream. He moved like a man possessed, reloading as he went, each breath measured, each step deliberate. Aiyana knelt beside a barrel, steadying her aim. She hit one through the chest, another in the thigh. The recoil slammed her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. Her braid swung loose, smoke and wind tangling through it. Then a door slammed open. From the main cabin, Hammond emerged. He looked older, but not smaller. A bear gone to fat, wrapped in a coat too fine for the desert. His silver watch caught the firelight gleaming like a coin tossed by the devil. "Well, look what the wind blew back," he sneered. "My little savage and her broken hound." Aiyana stepped from cover. "You burned my family." He laughed, voice thick with whiskey and contempt. "You betrayed them first." The words struck harder than the heat. Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. Silas lifted his revolver. "End this, Hammond." "End it," Hammond grinned. "Boy, you were part of it. Don't forget who paid your wages. Every bullet you fired back then, I bought it." The past ripped open between them. Before the war ended, before the massacre, Silas had ridden for Hammond's company, escorting supply trains, protecting convoys, looking the other way while Apache women were taken for trade or revenge. He'd told himself he didn't see, but he had. The shot came before the memory could finish forming. Hammond fired first. The bullet grazed Silas's arm, tearing through cloth and flesh. He staggered back, clutching the wound. The revolver slipped but didn't fall. Aiyana screamed his name, dropped to one knee and fired. Her bullet struck true through Hammond's shoulder, spinning him sideways into a post. He hit the ground hard, gasping, the silver watch snapping from its chain and sinking into the sand. Smoke thickened. Flames chewed through the walls, spreading fast with the wind. The outpost turned into a furnace. "Run," Silas rasped, reloading with shaking hands. "No." She tore a strip from her shawl and pressed it against his bleeding arm. "We finish it. The rest are coming." He pointed toward the yard where shadows moved, men shouting, boots slamming against the planks. Then came the horses, frightened, screaming, tearing free of their tethers. Aiyana grabbed Silas's arm. "We move now." They stumbled through the burning camp smoke, clawing at their lungs. Bullets hissed past, biting into the dirt. A stray round hit the horse tied near the fence. It reared, shrieked, then collapsed, thrashing in the sand. Aiyana's stomach turned, but she didn't stop. Behind them, Hammond's men shouted orders, their voices warped by the roar of fire. At the edge of the camp, a bullet tore through Silas's hat. He ducked, fired back blindly, and felt another graze slice across his ribs. His breath came ragged. The flames threw their shadows long against the canyon wall, two fugitives running through hell. When they finally reached the ravine, Silas dropped to his knees. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripping onto the dirt in slow, steady rhythm. Aiyana tore her scarf and pressed it to the wound. "Keep still," she whispered. He tried to laugh, but it came out a groan. "You're terrible at following orders. Then stop giving them." Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. For a moment they said nothing, both listening to the fire's distant roar. The desert around them glowed faintly red, as if even the sand remembered violence. "He's still alive," Silas muttered. "Then we go back," she said immediately. "No." His hand shot up, gripping her wrist. "You live. That's the only thing left worth winning." Her eyes glinted in the half-light, defiance mixed with grief. "You think living without purpose is winning? Sometimes it's enough." She pulled her hand free, staring at the smoke rising from the valley. "Not for me." Below them, Hammond crawled from the wreckage, one arm useless blood, soaking his coat. He stumbled toward the corral, cursing. Even from this distance she could hear him shouting orders, calling for his men, his voice a rotting echo of authority. Aiyana lifted the rifle sighting down the ridge. Her finger hovered on the trigger. "Don't," Silas said weakly. "You can't take back the kind of killing that close." "He took everything," she whispered. "He made me a traitor to my own." Silas looked at her, the way the wind tangled her hair, the way the moonlight turned the ash on her skin silver. Then, "Don't let him make you like him." The words hung there heavy as the desert air. For a moment it seemed she might lower the rifle. Then Hammond lifted his head, shouting again something about finishing what he started, about burning them all clean. The fury that rose in her chest wasn't revenge anymore. It was mercy twisted into something sharper. She fired. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. Hammond fell backward into the flames. Silas flinched but said nothing. The shot seemed to pull all the air out of the world. Aiyana's hands shook. The rifle slid from her grip and hit the dirt. "It's done," she said, though her voice sounded far away. He reached for her, his fingers barely brushing hers. "You did what I couldn't." "No," she said. "I did what I swore I never would again." The fire burned itself out slowly. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and iron toward them, the smell of something ending. Silas leaned back against a rock, eyes half closed. "You think the land ever forgives?" Aiyana watched the orange glow fade to gray. The land forgets nothing. It just buries you with the rest. He smiled faintly, blood at the corner of his mouth. Then maybe that's enough forgiveness for the likes of us. She tore another strip of cloth, bound his arm tighter. Don't talk like that. I'm fine, he lied. The desert wind rose, pulling sparks from the dying fire into the sky. For a heartbeat, they looked like souls, thin, bright, fleeting. Aiyana sat beside him, her hands stained red, her breath shallow. The silence between them felt alive again, not empty, but full of things lost, things done, things that couldn't be undone. Sleep, she whispered. He closed his eyes. If I do, don't let me wake to this place again. She turned her face to the wind. Then dream somewhere better. The night held them, two silhouettes against the smoldering horizon, bound by ash and memory. By dawn, the fire had burned itself to silence. Hammond's empire was nothing but smoke and scattered nails. The desert wind moved through it gently now, almost kind, sweeping the ashes into small, shapeless mounds. And somewhere between the fading stars and the first light of morning, the wind carried what neither of them could say, a sound like prayer or regret, or maybe forgiveness finally breaking free. Morning came on blood-colored light. The sun rose heavy and slow over the ridges, painting the valley in shades of rust and sorrow. Smoke still curled from the wreckage below, thin gray ribbons twisting upward until the wind tore them apart. The air tasted of iron and ash, like the earth itself had bled in the night. Silas woke to that taste, coughing. His chest burned. His shoulder pulsed with dull heat, where the bullet had grazed him, but his hand still remembered the shape of his gun. The instinct of survival was older than pain. He turned his head and saw Aiyana standing at the cliff's edge, her figure sharp against the crimson sky. Below them, Hammond's outpost still smoldered, half buried in smoke and silence. The smell of burnt oil and flesh mixed with the dust. Somewhere in the ruins, something moved. Hammond. Aiyana's eyes narrowed. He's not dead, she said. Silas didn't lift his head. Let him rot. She turned, face streaked with soot. He won't. Men like him never do. The words hung between them, a simple truth carved by too many graves. She started down the slope without another word, boots sliding in the loose dirt. Silas cursed under his breath and pushed himself to his feet. His ribs screamed with every breath, but he followed anyway, limping gun in hand, breath shallow and uneven. He had walked through war, through guilt, through deserts that ate men whole, but this was different. This was walking toward the end of something he couldn't name. The wind carried the sound of metal, striking metal. Hammond's voice, low, furious, still alive. They found him in the wreckage of the yard, kneeling beside a half-burned crate, jamming bullets into a rifle with his one good arm. His other sleeve was dark with blood. His face glistened with sweat, his skin blistered where the fire had kissed him. But his grin that survived, well, he rasped, eyes gleaming like a vulture's look who the desert forgot to bury. Aiyana's grip tightened on the rifle. You should have stayed in the fire. He spat blood into the dirt. You think you're clean now? You burned this place same as I did. You brought the killing. She raised the barrel slowly. You started it. The silence before the gunfire stretched thin as glass. Then it shattered. Her shot went wide, whistling past his ear. Hammond's didn't. The bullet slammed into Silas's chest. The sound wasn't loud, just a dull thud, the sound of something inevitable. He staggered, bent forward, but did not fall. His hand clenched the revolver. He took one step, then another. Aiyana screamed his name, voice breaking the still morning, but he didn't stop. Hammond fumbled for another bullet. His fingers slipped. He looked up just as Silas reached him. Don't, Hammond warned, but it was too late. Silas grabbed him by the collar and yanked him upright. The rifle fell between them, useless. Hammond's hand went for a knife, slashing wildly. The blade cut across Silas's arm, shallow but cruel. He didn't flinch. He caught Hammond's wrist, twisted hard until bone cracked. Then, with one brutal motion, he drove the knife back into Hammond's gut. The sound that came out of Hammond was half laugh, half gasp. You think killing me saves you? Silas's breath came ragged. No, he said, but it stops you. Hammond's knees gave out. He slid down slowly, still smiling through the blood. You'll die for nothing, Marshal. Just like the rest. Silas stepped back. The knife stayed in Hammond's body. The man shuddered once, then fell still. The desert claimed another secret. Silas turned, or tried to. The world tilted sideways. Blood spread across his shirt in a dark bloom, the color of dawn itself. He stumbled once, twice, and Aiyana caught him before he fell. "Stay with me," she said, her voice fierce but trembling. He smiled faintly. "I always said you were stubborn. Save your strength." His breath rattled. "You said once you'd rather die than be mine." Tears welled in her eyes, cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I remember. Guess you got your wish." "Don't you dare," she whispered, pressing her hand to his wound, trying to stop the blood with nothing but will. "You're not mine, Silas. You're free." He blinked slowly, eyes unfocused. "So are you." Then the strength went out of him. His hand slipped from hers, landing palm up in the sand. His chest stilled. The desert wind rose, lifting the last of the smoke into the pale sky. For a long time she stayed there, holding him until the warmth left his body. Around them the fire hissed out, leaving only embers and ash. When the sun finally climbed over the ridge, she laid him down gently, his hat beside him, his revolver across his chest. Her hands were red with his blood, but she didn't wipe them clean. Blood was memory, and memory was all she had left of him. She stood then, unsteady but alive, and looked at Hammond's body, the knife still buried in his stomach, the sand already darkening beneath him. His silver watch lay broken nearby, the glass cracked. She picked it up, turned it once in her palm, then dropped it beside him. "You always said time was money," she murmured. "Now it's neither." Then she knelt beside Silas again. The sun was bright now, merciless. She began to dig. No shovel, no ceremony, just her hands clawing into the earth. The ground was dry and stubborn, fighting her every inch. Dust filled her nails, mixed with blood, turned to mud when her tears finally fell. She didn't stop. When the hole was deep enough, she dragged the blanket from their pack and wrapped him in it. His revolver she placed beside him. The scarf he had given her she tied around his wrist. "Rest," she whispered. "The desert remembers mercy." She covered him with sand, smoothing it with her palms until the mound blended with the earth around it. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a piece of the broken chain, the one he had cut from her wrists the day they met. She laid it atop the grave. A marker, a promise. The wind picked up soft and warm for once, brushing her face as if to bless the moment. The smell of smoke was fading. In its place came the faint scent of sage and rain, impossible in this season, yet real enough to make her close her eyes. "You're free now," she said again, though she wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. She stood and looked out across the desert. The horizon shimmered with heat, endless and red. Every direction looked the same, open, empty, and waiting. She took Hammond's knife, cleaned it on her sleeve, and buried it beside Silas's grave. Then she pressed her palm to the earth one last time. "I will not forget," she said quietly. Then she turned away before her heart could break any louder. She walked toward the horizon, one figure against the endless red. Her shadow stretched long behind her, mingling with the dust. The wind tugged at her braid, at the torn edge of her shawl. The land opened before her like a door, wide and terrible and free. Behind her the dawn glowed faintly through the smoke, painting the sky with the color of forgiveness. For the briefest moment the world looked clean again, stripped of its noise, its lies, its cruelty. Just wind and earth and silence. And in that silence the desert sang its old song, the one only the lost ever heard. It wasn't sorrow, not exactly. It was something smaller and stronger, remembrance. She didn't look back. The dead didn't need her tears. They had the land now, and the land she knew kept everything. By midday the wind had buried every footprint. Only a single glint remained on the ridge, a silver watch half covered in dust, ticking once then, never again. Beautiful, this is where silence becomes elegy. No redemption promised, no love unbroken, only dignity and the desert remembering. By mid-morning the valley was nothing but smoke and stillness. Crows circled above, silent, wary of ghosts. Aiyana stood alone beside the mound of dirt that held Silas' veil. She had wrapped him in his coat, the one torn and dusted with his blood, and laid his hat over his chest. No crosses, no prayers. Only the wind and her breath. The desert didn't care for words. It only understood offerings. So she gave what she had. She unclasped the broken chain from her wrist, the same one he had cut days ago, and laid it over his grave. The metal was warm from her skin. Then she pressed her fingers to the soil, leaving 5 dark marks like petals. For a moment she whispered in her mother tongue, a prayer not for forgiveness but for memory. The wind answered, carrying her voice through the canyons until it was no longer a sound but a feeling that hummed through stone. She looked east. The horizon shimmered with light. Behind her, the ashes of Hammond's outpost twisted upward, pale as breath, disappearing into the same sky that had watched them both suffer. For the first time she smiled, not in peace but in defiance. She had lost everything but the right to stand, and in the desert that was enough. She gathered her things, his canteen, her knife, the woven charm she'd found beside her cousin's grave, and started walking. Each step left a soft